And then the building continued as a dry goods store and then a pharmacy that sold some wild concoctions until 1929. Why is the year 1929 important in that building's history?
Right. Because that's when this building really now starts to become owned by and used for the African-American community.
Okay.
This kind of marks that shift.
You heard that there. That is George Garner, the Assistant Director and Curator of the Civil Rights Heritage Center, talking about the importance of the year 1929 in the life of the West Side Recreation Club. More of that later, but first, thank you for listening to another episode of Round the Bend Now and Then. My name is Matt Emery, and I'm a local history nerd. My main mission in this podcast, as well as other Round the Bend material, is to create engaging content that shares how intertwined the South Bend and Mishawaka area's past is to our present. In the podcast, I interview local leaders, business owners, and community members to help tell their stories, because their stories help tell the story of South Bend and Mishawaka. In this episode, I meet with George Garner, the Assistant Director and Curator at Indiana University South Bend's Civil Rights Heritage Center. You'll learn about a building at 1415 West Washington Street that if you drove past today, you probably wouldn't even think twice about it. But for nearly 50 years, that small two-story storefront was the West Side Recreation Club, a vital social hub and gathering place for South Bend's African-American community. George is quite knowledgeable on South Bend's African-American history, weaving archives, oral histories, and community memory to tell how the city was shaped over generations. Quick background on this episode's topic. South Bend's African-American Landmark Tour highlights local Black history by guiding people to places where it actually happened, from schools and churches to neighborhoods and sites of political and social gathering. Created by Indiana University's South Bend Civil Rights Heritage Center, the tour later inspired George Garner's book, Placing History. One of those sites, and one of the book's chapters, is the West Side Recreation Club, a place that sat at the heart of African-American social and political life in South Bend for decades. As soon as I started reading the chapter on the West Side Recreation Club, I knew that I wanted to share its story. This was a building of sharp contrasts. Upstairs were offices used by some of South Bend's most prominent African-American professionals and leaders. Downstairs was a pool hall that was frequently targeted by police for alleged vices. That tension is exactly why this story matters, because it reveals how Black leadership, community, and power were built in South Bend while constantly facing scrutiny. We recorded this interview just up the street from the West Side Recreation Club, inside of the Civil Rights Heritage Center, once the Engelman Natatorium. While thousands of South Bend children learned to swim here, African-American children were segregated and denied equal access. Sitting in the former girls' changing room, now the center's library, it felt surreal to talk about Black history in a place shaped by struggle, resistance, and change. Anytime I interview an author about their work, I like to remind listeners that there's only so much that we can cover in a 45-minute podcast episode. You really have to read the book to fully understand the whole story, so I highly recommend checking out Placing History, not only to learn more about the West Side Recreation Club, but to discover the so many other important African-American landmarks here in our city. There is a link to where you can find more information about the book in this episode's show notes. Thank you for joining us, George, and thank you for your passion and dedication to sharing these stories. Before we dive into the interview, I wanted to thank the Portage Township Trustee's Office and MT Box Computers for sponsoring this episode. I am so very, very appreciative of our partnership. And now, learn all about the West Side Recreation Club with George Garner. Well, George, first, before we jump into history, can you briefly introduce yourself? Where are you from? What high school did you go to? All that good stuff.
Sure. So I did not grow up in South Bend.
Okay.
I'm an East Coaster by birth. I was born in New York, but I was raised in Northeast Pennsylvania. So I went to Pocono Mountain High School.
Okay, all right.
But did my undergraduate work in history, but then did my master's work in museum studies. And at a place that really embedded in us how museums, how archives, how historic houses, how historic sites in general,
Yes.
not only have the ability, but the responsibility to be
Yes.
truthful, and to show how things really were,
Uh-huh.
and to use that to think about our present.
Yes.
If all we do is study the past, then we're not doing it enough, right? We
Makes
have
sense.
to use that past to think deeply about our present,
Uh-huh.
and then think about how we want to see the world being different.
I love it. And to our listeners out there, that's literally what we do when we share our history is we talk about how the past affects our present and how that can affect the future.
Yeah,
No.
we're shaped by those things. It's not
Yes.
just the study of it just to study something academic. It's
Right.
the study to really try to understand how our society was built, how it
Mhm.
is now, how we engage with each other.
Yep.
But then also taking that next step to think about when we're not living up to our ideals, when we're not, when there are those of us who still aren't living up to those ideals. How do we work to make sure that we really live some of those ideals?
That makes
right?
total sense. Total sense.
Yeah.
All right, the book, Placing History, it grew out of the African American Landmark Tour here in South Bend. Can you talk a little bit about the origins of the tour and how that eventually turned into a book?
Yeah, so we started that project back in 2013.
Okay.
The place that we're in now, the Angman Natatorium, which I know we're going to talk a lot about in another episode, this was renovated in 2010.
Okay.
So immediately after, folks were thinking, certainly this wasn't the only building where African American history happened. There are so many. And we started thinking about ways that we could identify more of those physical locations and more of those stories. So they built this tour by choosing 17 sites of significance.
Okay.
A wide range of sites that had meaning and had relevance to local African American people and African American history. So schools, churches, places of business, and social organizations. So we launched this in 2013 and was a really successful project. And like any project of its scope, just needed some refreshing.
Yeah.
So what we did in 2010 was did a complete refresh by building a brand new website for it, building brand new signs to put out in some of the sites.
Yeah.
And we thought, as we're doing new research, as new things have come up over the past 7 years, as we're doing some more writing, I initially envisioned this as a booklet. I was thinking we would do maybe a 100-page, maybe 5 pages per site.
Yeah.
And so that was my initial thought. And I brought some folks into that project to work with me to edit and help with research and writing. And my first draft of my first chapter came back 26 pages. Single spaced. So the poor editor, I could hear her eyes just bulge out when I sent it to her. But very quickly we realized that some of these sites really they've had some historical work done, but just hadn't had that long form written about them yet. And this is one of those examples where I didn't lead the project led me, because it really told me this isn't a booklet.
Yes.
This is a book.
Yes.
And so we scaled it from 17 sites down to 10.
Okay.
But then went into real depth on those 10 sites.
So today I want to dive deeper into one of those spots on the tour, 1415 West Washington Street on the corner of Birdsell and West Washington. As that building now just sits there empty, but that building was more than a building. For over 50 years, it was the West Side Recreation Club. Before we dive into the building itself, I do think it's important that our listeners have some context to the neighborhood. Just over the years, how has this awesome near West Side neighborhood changed, transformed over the years?
Yeah. Well, from the 19th into the 20th century, South Bend is becoming this industrial powerhouse, right? The waterways that had been powering some of the industries beforehand by the St. Joseph River, electricity is a relatively new invention, and it's spreading wildly. And mass electricity generation allows those factories to leave the water power and build in other places. And so from the 19th to the 20th century, it was mostly swampland. You could drive down to about roughly where the West Side Recreation Club is now, and you would have not been able to go any further. It would have been all natural waterways. But what South Bend is doing is changing that natural landscape into this kind of industrial landscape. And so companies like Studebaker and Bendix and Singer Sewing Machine and Oliver, they're starting to build those factories further west. And it's people's hard labor that are running these factories. And it's generating the incredible wealth that was largely flowing upwards. And so with that need for people to generate that wealth, you see Eastern European immigration moving to head west, but you see them being met by African-American people heading north. So as African-American people are fleeing the incredible violence of the Jim Crow South from the 19th into the 20th century, the end of the Civil War, leading into the hope for African-American people to become equal citizens alongside everyone else. White supremacy, slavery, these are not going away. These are reinforcing themselves in other ways. So there's an incredible amount of violence in the South that's pushing people north, along with an incredible amount of things that are happening in Eastern Europe that are pushing people west. And they tend to meet in industrial cities like South Bend. And so that's what happens around this area over the course of the 20th century. It's starting to move from a natural kind of swamp landscape into an industrial landscape, largely populated by both African-American and Eastern European.
Got it. In this particular neighborhood, what Hungarian and Poland was Polish?
Yeah, Polish is among our largest, and places like Hungary, you see some from Austria, but those are kind of the three main Eastern European cultures that are coming and are, of course, being met with African-American people.
Definitely. All right, now let's dive into the building at 1415 West Washington now. Before it became such a powerful community space, the West Side Recreation Club opened as Samuel Gutstein's dry goods store and also his home. And then the building continued as a dry goods store and then a pharmacy that sold some wild concoctions until 1929. Why is the year 1929 important in that building's history?
Right. Because that's when this building really now starts to become owned by and used for the African-American community. This kind of marks that shift. African-American people had always been a part of South Bend since before its founding in 1865. But as I was talking, this period of time that is known as the Great Migration, when people are leaving the South and moving north, this is indelibly altering both the African-American community and the community as a whole. By 1930, the African-American community had nearly quintupled from what it was in 1910.
That's crazy.
And
20 years.
Continuing to grow from there in terms of numbers and then in terms of the percentage as well.
And then so in 1929 was pretty much the first year that you could find in the newspapers that 1415 West Washington was kind of
owned by African-American people and becoming the West Side Recreation Club.
Speaking of owning by African-American folks, the West Side Recreation Club definitely shifted into something much bigger. What role did Henry Hill play in all of that?
Yeah, he was the person who owned it and he ran it. And so
he was the first owner, right?
Yeah, I believe that's true. And he became this community leader as a result of it.
How did folks in the community see him?
Yeah, I mean, he's the center of that hub, right? Or the center of that club. He's involved in some of various social clubs in the area, groups like the Knights of Pythias, among some others. He's this go-to person for people looking to connect. If you need somebody who's well-connected in the neighborhood, who knows folks, he's one of those people.
So he's one of those dudes who he's got a guy.
Yeah.
I need a guy.
I think that's fair to say, right? If you need a guy, you know at least the guy to go to who's got a guy.
And you mentioned all the various social clubs too, that at that time, that was huge.
Right. I mean, this is the network that people were using in order to meet other people, in order to do business, in order to get things done. Particularly, in an age before social media and maybe online groups. Social clubs like the Knights of Pythias and some others, and even a building like the West Side Recreation Club would be a place that you would go to try to understand your new community, start to meet people, start to connect.
Yeah, of course. Definitely. Yeah. And then Henry Hill was viewed by the neighbors, by the folks who frequented the club, just as a leader, as a community leader. Talk to us how that compared to like city officials and the police viewed him.
Well,
from what you can tell in your research.
The thing is, it's also fair to say that this club had some shall we say, just some less than legal things going on, right?
Yeah.
We can't lose sight, I mean, of the fact this was a pool
Legit.
hall, right? This was a place where people came to gamble. They're playing pool games, they're playing dice games. There's some other forms of vice in here. We're nearing prohibition, so probably, I can't prove, but it's a reasonable bet to say some alcohol is being traded there as well. And so, there's a tension sometimes in how we see these spaces, right? And so, and this is based on some of the rampant discrimination that was happening around this time as well. Places like Studebaker, they were the largest industrial employer of African American people, but they were only hiring in some of the dirtiest and the most dangerous jobs. African American people were not being asked to do the design work of the cars. They're being asked to work in the foundry. There were doctors, there were lawyers, there were Black professionals. There was a lot of them, but there were still just limits on how many of those types of jobs were available.
Right.
So for somebody like Hank Hill, he's finding this opportunity. He is running this place that, yes, it has vice. Yes, it has these illicit and at least technically illegal things going on, but he's taking the risk from that. And that's why he becomes targeted and arrested from that.
Okay.
Reasonable to acknowledge that he's breaking the law, but also reasonable to acknowledge that his options were somewhat limited. And so, as the leader of this club, as the person who is largely responsible, he's the one who becomes, has a target on his back from it. And it's, we're talking the 1930s. It's hard to prove with evidence,
of course,
but there's suggestion that some of that money is going somewhere. So if you're a beat cop and the places where vice is happening, you might be able to get a little skimmed off the top of that. Right? This is not unique to South Bend. This is true basically everywhere. Anybody who's read anything about Al Capone knows what I'm talking about, right? That some police officers were at the very least complicit in this and at most directly involved in this. The money tended to flow to some of that. And so, and that meant that if you were a police officer or a police chief and you're getting some of that, you're probably going to tell your officers to look the other way. But the minute there's a new mayor that comes in or a new police chief or the money dries up or, the check doesn't clear for whatever reason, boom, they're called. People are, there's a raid, few people are arrested, but
printed in the paper, big arrests here and then back at it.
Cut down on crime, but then he's back the next day and the exact same stuff is happening. So it seems like a bit of a charade, but this happens over and over and over again for years. Years.
And I found it, you had mentioned in your writing when Henry Hill got murdered. And there were hardly any articles about it.
I really don't have that many details on the murder. And I think that highlights that
what I'm saying.
I was just talking about, right? I don't know that police had viewed his life with enough value to investigate and hold his murderer accountable. And that might be the same of the newspaper reporters. He becomes seen as this vice person instead of somebody connected.
Instead of a leader, instead of a community leader.
Right? And I think it's fair to us to hold both of those views at the exact same time. He can be somebody who is engaged in illegal and vice activities, but also somebody who was connected and somebody who was in the social clubs and somebody who was not connected as well.
We'll take a break here to thank one of our sponsors, the Portage Township Trustee Office. If you're not familiar with the work of the trustee's office, this is one of those local government offices that quietly but critically supports our community every single day. From emergency assistance and housing support to food programs and help for neighbors who are facing tough times, the Portage Township Trustee Office exists to make sure people don't fall through the cracks. Trustee Jason Critchlow and his team are consistently fighting for the needs of Portage Township residents. And it's not just talk, folks. Jason does a great job of helping us understand what's happening right now, what current events are actually affecting us locally, and what we can do about them. He's transparent, communicative, and deeply invested in educating the community he serves. What I especially appreciate about Jason is that he doesn't just stay local. He frequently travels to the State House to advocate directly for Portage Township residents, making sure our voices are heard at the state level. So if you or someone you know needs assistance, or if you simply want to better understand the resources available in our community, I encourage you to check out portagetownship.com or follow the Portage Township Trustee Office on Facebook. There's a ton of helpful and timely information there. A huge thanks to Jason and his entire team for the work that they do and for supporting Round the Bend now and then. Local stories and local services like this are what help keep our community strong. Side note, I wrote that whole thing prior to reaching out to Jason and his team for input, because that's how much I know they do. Literally, I sat down, wrote a list of the things that they do for our community, and then put it into a narrative. Once again, thank you. And now, back to the episode. Then after Hank or Henry Hill was murdered, the new owners, they continued to grow the club. Over the next multiple decades, what did it offer socially, culturally, emotionally that may not have been available in other spots to African Americans in our city?
I mean, there were other pool halls. There were other places like this, particularly as we move into the next decade. So this wasn't the only place, but it was a place where African American people could feel safe and be seen. So again, we're talking about an era of rampant discrimination. Places like the Angman Natatorium,
where we're sitting in now.
This is a place that had denied entry to African American swimmers for years. So even just going in to be able to go for a swim was a place where you were told, just based on the skin color you had, whether and where you belonged. This is not the only place. You would be denied entry at most of the stores downtown, most of the restaurants downtown. There was stark, clear segregation in South Bend.
Hey, George, several notable African-American leaders in South Bend had offices in the West Side Recreation Club. Can you talk about some of those people, who they were and why they mattered?
I mean, these are people like Dr. Mott, who we believe was the first African-American doctor. People like Dr. Bernard Streets, who was the first African-American dentist in South Bend. He was actually a graduate of Indiana University's dental program in 1929. People like J. Chester Allen, who was a lawyer in his own right. He was the first African-American person to sit on the South Bend City Council. He represented South Bend and the area in the Indiana legislature. He and his wife, who was a lawyer and a judge in her own right as well, Elizabeth Fletcher Allen, they both had offices later downtown. I think you know that there's a historical marker in front of it. It's right across from the county building, from the old courthouse. But before, long before they were able to do that, this is where they had, or he had his first office there. So we talked about that duality of this place, right? Where it was doing some less than legal things, but it was also providing support. And this is the example of some of these early African-American professionals who were able to have office space, who were able to build their own businesses before they were able to expand, become community leaders in their own right.
Kind of like an incubator.
Exactly.
All right. When we talk about gambling here, we're not talking about the flashy casinos out in Vegas with the bright lights and the ding, 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 ding constantly. Can you clarify what gambling might have actually looked like in this space?
So, one example of a game that might have been played is where you, for a really small amount of money, I don't know exactly how much, but maybe a nickel, a dime, it wasn't nothing back then, but not going to break the bank for everyone. You would go and pay that small amount of money and you'd get a little piece of paper, and that piece of paper would have some numbers on it. And then at the end of the day, they'd have, a big globe with a bunch of little numbered balls inside, and somebody would reach in and grab some of those numbered balls, and if the numbers that they pulled matched the numbers that you had on your sheet, well, then you would probably win half of that day's tally. If this sounds familiar to anybody listening, this is the lottery.
That's what this
is the Hoosier Lottery. This is the same thing that happens every single day in every corner gas station that you can go to. This is not considered vice, or at least certainly not something that's targeted as being illegal. This is something that is used by governments to supplement some of their tax dollars.
Right.
So, but when it was run by African American people, this was then villainized and targeted by police. But moved into the broader society, then it becomes sanctioned and completely legal and barely noticed. Right. And so, in the book, and I know you noticed this as well, there was that piece written by a community member by the name of Willie Green, and he's asking that question: why are African Americans prosecuted for gambling while some others are not? And this is the point that he was trying to make. How many people are betting on the outcome of a football game? Probably just like the one we saw with Indiana University and the Hoosiers just recently as we're taping this, right? Why is it that sometimes these things are considered vice and some of these things are considered something that we can largely ignore?
Right.
And so, that's the question that I think is a fair question for us to ask. To think about that difference and to think about that tension between the two. Now, I want to be careful. Gambling in general, even the lottery, that has harmed people. So I want to be careful about how we're framing this. It's not to say that it's completely innocuous, that nothing terrible had ever happened. Certainly, some more higher level crimes had happened. As a result of that, but I do think that question about when it's low stakes, then it's targeted, but then when it becomes part of the broader community, it becomes sanctioned and ignored. And then skin colors and who is benefiting from that money and the skin color of that person, that seems to be the difference. I think that's worthy enough to give us some pause.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what Willie was saying in that editorial or Voice of the People or whatever he wrote is that,
And I think he was writing this in the 1960s or 1970s, right?
Which is awful.
So that's a fair question to ask.
Yeah, for sure. Most definitely. You had written in there and kind of in passing over some time, you wrote over the next several decades, the pages of the Tribune, and this is just the dichotomy of this place, volleyed back and forth between news of pleasant social gatherings and raids by the police. But it got more than raided by the South Bend police. The federal FBI ended up getting involved, right?
Yeah, and that's when things really started to
that
change.
In the 1970s, I think it was?
Yeah, and we're starting to see now an escalation where once the federal government becomes involved and starts raiding the place, this marks its end of that volleying back and forth, where it ceases to become anything for a while.
You had mentioned the newspapers said the mayor had no clue that the feds were coming, right? But this was like the FBI.
And that might, we can't confirm or deny that. We don't know that for sure. We don't know how much the FBI had tipped off the mayor beforehand. They may not have. But at least this escalation now marks this official end of how this place had been used and the start of its I don't want to necessarily use the word decline, though. But at least the end of the building being used on a regular basis.
I see. Now about the 1970s, You had written that the owner, Wiley Hoover, went to jail in 1979, and that's literally just what you're just talking about now, is that was pretty much the end of it. And in 1986, it closed finally, and you said in 2005 it was a food pantry.
But there is some new hope for this that has come out, especially since the book as well. So there's an owner of the building now.
Really?
And there's a group of some people in South Bend who are part of an organization that's run through Indiana Landmarks, but it's called the Black Heritage Preservation Program. And there's different chapters throughout the state. And South Bend has a group of this. And so it's a small group, but it's looking at different sites. And how can we help revitalize these sites, protect these sites, and save these sites? And so we're at the very earliest of stages on that. But Indiana Landmarks did list the West Side Recreation Club as one of its most endangered. Because the building is in really rough shape.
It is.
But that also means that now is the chance and now is the opportunity. And if we can put some focus on that building and build more people who want to help save that building and get behind it. Again, we're at the earliest of the stages now, so there's no kind of concrete way to say what's going forward. But hopefully what we'll see over the next months and years is a real concerted effort to bring this place back.
That's awesome, and I hope that this little episode here can even contribute to that. Thank you for listening to another episode of Round the Bend Now and Then. An extra special thanks to George Garner for helping to bring this powerful local piece of history to life. George, thank you for your knowledge and thank you for your passion for helping to tell our community's stories. Join us again next time as we learn more about South Bend and Mishawaka's now and then.